Okay, well, I think that we're going to get started. Thank you so much to everyone for coming to this Lemons Legacies Porch Talk on the African American experience at William Mary and historical overview. Thank you especially to Melissa Simpson, Allison Norfolk, and Andrew Smith from the Williamsburg Regional Library. We're excited to be partnering with the Williamsburg Regional Library for this series of Porch Talks this year throughout the 2020-2021 academic year. So how tonight's going to run is we're going to do some brief introductions of our panelists, and then we are going to get into some questions. And we're thankful to the questions that have already been submitted. So this is a discussion of the African American experience at William Mary, and please ask questions. You can do so by chatting in the chat. You can ask questions in the chat, and you can also ask questions in the question and answer function. So Molly, as you can see, she's going to be monitoring the questions, and we'll be going over them. So let's get into introductions. Let me put up the slide. Hold on just a second. All right. So let me push go. So this was the title page where we're going to be focusing on a section of the report. And then we're also going to be asking questions to Professor McLendon, who wrote Building on the Legacy. So let's get into introductions. Jody, would you like to go first?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jody Allen, and I'm an assistant professor of history and the Robert Francis Ames Director of the Lemon Project. And I am once again very happy to have you all with us.
Thank you. Dr. McLendon?
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. And I also want to thank Jody and Sarah and everyone for inviting me to be on the panel. I am Professor Emeritus of English at William and Mary. And this, the book that Sarah mentioned is one that I wrote during or started writing during the 50th anniversary of the first African American students in residence at the college. So it was a book that came as a result of that time period. So thank you.
Thank you. Jawan?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jawan Johnson, and I am the new Mellon postdoctoral fellow with the Lemon Project. So I'm happy to participate in this conversation, and I look forward to the dialogue this evening.
Thank you. Molly?
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Shiloh. I'm a PhD student in the American Studies program, and I'm one of the graduate assistants for the Lemon Project.
Thank you. Caroline Watson is our anthropology graduate assistant, and she's currently in class, so she will hopefully be joining us a little bit later. My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm the Lemon Project program manager, and I've been working for the Lemon Project since 2016, full-time since 2018. So I'm gonna stop sharing for now. Okay. And I just wanted to reiterate that we really want to thank Dr. McLendon for joining us tonight, and that the book that she wrote, Building on the Legacy, African Americans at William Mary, An Illustrated History of 50 Years and Beyond, was released in 2019, and it is available for purchase at the William Mary Barnes and Noble bookstore. And I heard that they will mail it to you, so you don't have to go in person. I also wanted to say that this event will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where there will be captions. We apologize that we do not have captions for tonight's event live. So we already received some questions, so I want to go straight into the questions. This question is for you, Jody. The chapter that we read in the Lemon Project report provides an overview of the long history of African Americans at the university. And we often talk about enslaved people that William Mary owned and rented, but we had a question about what life was like for free African Americans here at the college. Can you talk some about that?
Well, we don't know. We don't have a long list of free Blacks at the college, but there was a man named John Wallace de Rosario, who we believe was actually born free. And he was a gunsmith, sorry. He was a gunsmith. He owned property in York County. And he was apparently very good at his job, because in 1806, a group of about 32 white men from York County, James City County, and Williamsburg petitioned the court for him to have permission to continue working at his trade. So, and he needed that so he could carry and deal with their guns. And so there's no real indication that what happened with that petition, but we know apparently he was good enough and respected enough for them to go to take that measure. Also in 1807, we know that at some point, Mr. Rosario contacted or came to the attention of Bishop James Madison, who was the president of William and Mary at the time. And apparently he requested the opportunity to sit in on classes at William and Mary. And we know this because Madison wrote a letter to the director of the Armory in Richmond, suggesting that he hire John Wallace de Rosario. And in the letter, he mentioned that Mr. de Rosario could read, write. He had taught himself some Latin. He also knew geometry, and he was a very intelligent young man, in that he thought he should be taken on by the Armory in Richmond. We don't know what happened with that either, but these are two very tantalizing primary sources that we hope someday to be able to learn the rest of his story. And there were certainly other free Blacks in Williamsburg. We just don't know of a lot of them actually who were associated in some way with the college.
Thank you, Jody. For the next question, I'm thinking either Jody or Dr. McLendon can answer about primary sources. You talked about primary sources just now. So what are some challenges in working with the kind of primary sources that you've been working with, and how have you worked through some of these challenges?
Jackie, do you want to go?
Well, I guess I can. I think that the biggest challenge, I think, is that some things are just not available, that you go through records and you can't find anything. One of the things that happened when I was doing some of the research for the book in our library at SWIM is that there was like one box called Negro Education. And that was where everything, just about everything, I think it's still probably named that, and it's still like that. But I have talked with the director of the special collections about perhaps they're digitizing some things, but that was a huge challenge, was to find the records and to be able to go through them. I got really interested in the Navy chaplaincy school that was here in the 1940s, and I wanted to get more information. And I had a couple of really good students who did a lot of the digging and came up with some information. But it was very difficult to find information about the chaplaincy school and the attendees, and whether or not my main interest was whether or not the first Black naval chaplain, whose name was James Brown. Actually, how can you forget a name like James Brown? But he was the first Black really to be at William and Mary at that time in about 1943. And there just was nothing that would indicate whether or not they took any classes with any of the professors who were here at the time, how connected they were. So it's really that lack of being able to follow leads that I found really, really challenging when I was doing the research. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that happened.
Yeah, I agree. Regardless, I think sometimes of what century you're dealing with, being able to follow up sometimes and find supporting documents for primary sources. Also, a lot of the ones that I work in I'm also dealing with handwriting. And sometimes people write, very neat. And sometimes it's not even the neatness. Sometimes it's very curvy, fancy lettering that it's hard to read also. And so that can be a challenge. Also, again, with the period I'm dealing with, most of the primary sources were recorded by the oppressive class, right? So we're learning about these people through their eyes, and so trying to figure out what the enslaved or the free Blacks, if they didn't read or write, what they thought and felt can be very challenging. And especially if you're not being able to find a set of sources that you can compare and contrast and see if you can get a good picture. So that's one of the bigger challenges.
Yes.
Thank you. I was thinking a lot of the research for the Lemon Project has been done by graduate students. I did some research when I was a graduate fellow for the Lemon Project. And I'd like to ask you a question, Molly, about what kind of research are you doing in your role as the graduate assistant this year?
Yeah, so I'm new to the Lemon Project team, so I'm just sort of getting my feet wet in terms of the research that this project does. But right now I'm working on looking into various presidents of the college, thinking about James Blair and sort of presidents specifically pre-Civil War, and to look through those documents within special collections at our library for presences or names or information about enslaved people at the college or owned by people working at the college.
Thank you for sharing that. Juwan, in terms of the research that you're interested in, can you talk a little bit about what that might look like? You are also new, but can you talk a little bit about what you want to pursue in your research while you're with us?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I also wanted to follow up on the answers that Dr. Allen and Dr. McLendon gave in terms of the challenges when the sources don't exist, because I found in my own research, you definitely, as will be discussed in the class that I'm constructing, going beyond the archives, African American history research and research methodologies, I'm going to be looking at some of those challenges and exploring those challenges, because sometimes there is a story in the absence of information. It could have been courthouse, and places were burned, whatever. And you also sometimes have to be very inventive in the sources. Place tells a story, and there are clues that you can pick up along the way. Sometimes there's just not a clue. So I'm hoping that through our research, as far as genealogy, which is kind of a new venture for the Lemon Project, that we'll be able to unearth some of this and find some case studies, and hopefully build this connection with the descendant communities who may have ties to those who were enslaved by the college. And so in terms of my research, I'm looking forward to that in terms of doing the genealogy research and engaging the community more deeply in that process, and also making myself available as a researcher and providing any tools or any guidance, particularly with the course that will come about in the fall of 2021. And so, yeah, so that's my plan.
Thank you. That's great. We had a question on the Bray School, on William Mary's relationship to the Bray School. Jody, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, technically the Bray School, well, not technically, actually, the Bray School was not owned by William and Mary, although Benjamin Franklin recommended the location, Williamsburg, to the people who were looking for a place to put a Bray School. And so, but we do know that, for example, 2 children, and probably more, but we know that Fanny and Adam, who were owned by William and Mary, did attend the Bray School. And so we know that it was located, we think now, somewhere near where, if you're in Williamsburg or familiar with Williamsburg, Aromas, Prince George Street, somewhere in that general area. And so we're looking to find out more about the Bray School. We know that the girls learned to sew, they all learned to read, and the idea was to provide them Christian education. It's not clear whether or not they learned to write, but we do know that thanks to, I believe, 3 summers of archaeological digs, they found the largest collection of slate pencils of anywhere, ever, any single place in Williamsburg. And so that might mean something. You know, they were doing something with those utensils. I mean, they could have just been marking fabric or what have you, but that's an awful lot to find in one place. But we just don't know for sure if they learned to write, but we do know they learned other skills.
Thank you. Another question that we had was about oral histories. And I know that they were crucial to your work in your book, Dr. McLendon. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of oral histories on the book, and maybe relay some meaningful moments that you might have had during this process? You're muted.
Trying to keep, you know, for you from hearing my dog bark or anything like that, and I forget I muted myself. But I did have a lot of meaningful moments with the oral histories. And I have to say, when we talked about challenges, I was going to say one of the things that really helped a lot during that research is the fact that we had oral histories to look at. Arthur Knight, who is a colleague, former colleague, I guess, I don't know what to call people that, since I'm retired, but I still consider him a colleague. So you know, he did a lot of work with oral histories in sort of the Williamsburg project, and he worked with me very closely. Definitely still a colleague. He worked with me very closely on much of what I was able to get in that from the early recordings that are in the library. I was so grateful for his help, and also for the fact that those things were there. And I also, another really meaningful moment for me is that when the book came out, I was contacted by a man by the name of William Molyneux, and his wife had been a librarian, and I knew her very well, Mary Molyneux, and he saw that the book was, out, and he contacted me, and he had lots of information. I had heard some recordings that he had done. There were some people that I had never been able to meet, that the recordings are there. Those oral histories were just such a tremendous help in putting the story together. And those were two people who were really instrumental in helping me get that information. And I actually did a lot of recordings myself. I don't know if you call those histories. I guess you do. But I did a lot of them myself with people who were on the board. I got a number of people to talk to me about their experiences. So it was maybe even, I'd say more than half of what I have in the book came from actual oral histories, or at least, that much came from the oral histories and people that I interviewed, and people who had been interviewed through the project that Dr. Knight headed up.
Well, yeah, we've done some oral histories related, that the Lemon Project has done, and that's we've done a few alums and members of the local community, and probably the one that will always stand out to me was a lady, she was in her 80s, and she told me a story about. She had gone to the Bruton Heights School, which was a segregated school for Black children. And the man who was the superintendent of schools at the time did not believe that the Black students deserved to wear a cap and a gown. And so they made, pretty dresses, and the guys wore suits for graduation. And I saw those pictures in the newspaper. The white students at the school had their graduation picture, they had on caps and gowns. The Black students were dressed very nicely, but no caps and gowns. But what she said to me was that she didn't get to go to college. And so the only time in her life that she could have worn a cap and a gown, it was taken from her. And she teared up, and I have to admit, I have done a lot of oral histories, but I teared up too, because this woman was almost 90 years old, and that was still painful for her. And so those again, that's a memory that stood out to me.
Well, we have a question that really goes straight in. This goes straight into this question. Dr. McLendon talked about these meaningful moments. Have any of you ever experienced negative discoveries that made you have to step away from your work for a time? And how do you cope with reading and interpreting stories from oppressors? That's to anyone who'd like to answer.
Well, I will just go first, just because I'll remember the question if I go first. But one of the things that really happened, and this didn't have anything to do with oral histories, but it did have to do with my research. And I was looking through, excuse me, old Flat Hat copies, and the number of photos of people in blackface was just I have to say that threw me. I don't know why I didn't expect it, but I guess I just didn't. And there were, dorm parties and all of these kinds of social activities. And there were people in blackface, and they had brooms and housekeeping kinds of things, like they were, housekeepers or whatever. And that threw me quite a bit. So looking at those pictures and thinking those were part of the books, I said flat hat, but that's not what I meant. The
Colonial Echo?
Yeah, the yearbooks, those were the ones where those pictures would be. And when that business came up recently with the governor, I thought about it and thought, this is, and I think the thing that really got to me was that they weren't so far in the distance either. That there were some that were really, really pretty recent. And so that got to me, and I think I did have to step back a bit and just kind of regroup and rethink what I was actually doing. And so, yeah, there are moments like that you'll come across. I'm done.
No, I didn't know if Jawan wanted to.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely had that experience quite a bit in my research, particularly with my dissertation, which is called "They Didn't Burn Down Our Spirits: Heritage Terrorism and the Resurgence of Black Church Burnings in the Age of Obama." And so I'm really deeply analyzing racialized terror in many forms. And so in reviewing and doing case studies on earlier church burnings, I also came across several articles of lynchings. And particularly some of the pastors of these churches were doing execution sermons before someone was going to be executed. And there was one particular case actually a couple of cases that stood out there that really prompted me to step away from the research for about a day or two, just to kind of think through that and process that. And so there are definitely moments, particularly if I'm doing, because I heavily relied on oral testimonies in doing this research and building these case studies. And so the grief that comes along with losing place is resonates just as deeply as losing a person, particularly with the memories attached to that place. And so there were several moments throughout that research period over the course of 2 years where I had to take a step back and analyzing and examine and really think about the research, what parts I wanted to include, what parts I did not want to include, because I also wanted to be sensitive to those who were telling the story. And some parts of the story didn't warrant being publicized. And so those are decisions you have to make, particularly when you're dealing with very sensitive topics and studying racialized terror. That's definitely a topic that you do encounter quite a bit of research and archival information that resonates with you on many different ways and wants you to kind of sometimes have to take a step back just to recalibrate.
Yeah. I've had those, the same kind of experience, whether it was, my own research related to my dissertation or research related to the Lemon Project, and just reading secondary sources. Sometimes, you have to, it can be overwhelming, and you do have to stop and take a break. And I actually will tell my students that, depending on what it is, I may give them a warning. You may want to start reading this a little early because you're going to need to take breaks from it. And so because it can be very painful and make you question what you're doing again and why you're doing it.
In talking about what you're doing, Jody, can you briefly discuss what energized the prompt that energized the creation of the Lemon Project, how we got started, and so basically what happened before the Board of Visitors resolution, and what has the alumni response been to the Lemon Project?
Okay. Well, the start was a student, and she was the one of the senators for the class of 2008, Tassimi Zagayi, and she, I believe, was kind of introduced to this topic of slavery at William and Mary in a class, and became more and more curious about it, and started looking into some things, and presented to the student assembly the idea of a resolution. And so they worked on it for several months. And I think that, that there was some pushback here and there. But they came up with a resolution that called on William and Mary to study its history, to make that history public, and to establish a memorial to the enslaved. And that she was working also outside of the student assembly with the student chapter of the NAACP, in particular, Rachel Faithful and Justin Reed were leaders at that time. And so that started it. And I know even before that, there were faculty members on campus who were trying to get the university to deal with race and race relations on campus. And so but I also think it matters, who's in place in terms of the administration and the responses you get. And so this 2008, 2009, they received positive responses. And so the two resolutions, the student resolution, and then there was a faculty resolution, and then a man named Robert Ings was brought in to do some of the initial work, the initial research, and he and some graduate students did that. There was a committee established, and so he wrote the report that went to the Board of Visitors in 2009, and based on that report, the Lemon Project was established. And I think there was another part to that question, but I forgot it.
The alumni response to the Lemon Project, and perhaps you could briefly talk about the memorial, what stage we're at in the memorial process.
Okay. The alumni response has been very positive. And so at least of the people who've spoken to me and who've written to us. Now, there's some people who say they're alums, and there have been responses to newspaper articles, and you can do that anonymously, and you can make yourself whoever you want to be in that situation. And so we've gotten some pushback in those in our responses to news and magazine articles, but I actually don't read them anymore. And so I don't know what the response has been there, but the response where the people are, talking to us and coming to events and emailing and saying positive things has been really good. So, yeah. And the memorial process, which is kind of the third part of the what the students called for, is going very well. We had a design competition in 2018. The winning piece design was announced in spring of 2019. And so we've had an architectural firm has worked too, because while the design was drawn, you needed to figure out actually how to make it work, and so they had an architectural firm that we've been working with. There's a building committee on campus, and we're working with the architectural firm. And right now we are designated to start, hopefully, the groundbreaking in January, February, with a hopeful finish date, October 2019. 2021. I don't want to go start over in 2019. We can't do 2020 again. So we're hoping that by homecoming of 2021, the memorial will be ready and people will be able to come and join us and see it.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone to please ask questions in the chat or the question and answer function. My next question is for Dr. McLendon. The Lemon Project report deals a little bit with Marion Johnson Carter and goes into her, but I know that you worked with her family when you were working on the book. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because she's such a fascinating person. If you could talk about what it was like to work with her family. Unmute. It's okay.
Yeah, it was bittersweet because I started talking to one of her sons who their family has a funeral home in Newport News. And so I started talking to his name, Fred Carter. And I told him what the project was and what we were going to do. And we were in the midst of the 50th. And so he was really, cooperative, and he told me that, we could interview and do all of that. And when I called back just a few months later, he had died suddenly. And so I was just really, it was like I knew him so, personally, and I really had only talked to him a couple of times on the phone. And so when I called, his wife answered, and she said, that he had passed suddenly, and told me that her daughter and her son would probably be able to be helpful. So I talked to them, and I got most of the information from his son, from James Carter, who went to, both of them went, they were Miriam Carter's grandchildren, and they both attended William and Mary. And when they were there, one of them the granddaughter went to undergraduate school, and she was a winner of the Sullivan Award. And the grandson went to the law school. And so they were both pretty familiar with what was going on. But James Carter, her grandson, came across this manuscript that his father had started writing about, that sort of a whole history of Gloucester. And he came in and we talked, and he gave me this, what's the thing you stick in your computer with that you can get information on? I'm blanking on the name, but flash drive. He gave me this, and he said, guard this with your life, and don't let anybody else have it, because I'm going to write this story one of these days, but you can use whatever you want to use. And so I learned a lot about Miriam Carter just from the material that he gave me. I learned too that she had gone to girls' high school in Philadelphia, which I was really familiar with, but someone I know introduced me to a woman who had been sort of their archivist for a while. And she gave me a lot of information about the school and Miriam Carter's time there, who her teacher was. There's a photo in the book of the person who was the principal, I think, at the time that she was there. And it's a very interesting story. She went there, and she went to Temple. And the interesting thing about what happened with William and Mary is that she applied to the School of Education, I think, first. Mm-hmm. And she was rejected. And then she also applied to what is now VIMS. She was rejected. She wanted to do something with the Omohundro Institute. She was applying to whatever she could get. And so they finally let her in the law school, and then they were amazed that she didn't do well or something. And I thought, well, she didn't want to go to the law school. But it turns out that through her grandson, I learned that she didn't really ever intend to get a degree here, that she was part of the sort of project where they were testing whether or not some of these institutions were following up after Brown versus Board. And so she was kind of, I guess you might even call her a plant in some ways, but that was the test. She had not, she left and went back to teaching, and the funeral home had photographs all over the place of her and other members of the family, and her classroom. They supplied me with all that information. And the wonderful thing about our library is that I had so much help. One day, Jay Gidmore, the director of Special Collections, and Kim, who was here at the time, and I'm blanking on Kim's last name, but pardon?
Kim Sims.
Yeah, Kim Sims. I don't, this is what happens when you're retired, I think. But we all went to the funeral home, and they collected all of these photographs that were on the wall, some of them that had been there for like ages, and they were, had to be handled with care. But they brought all of these things back to the library and photographed them and made them available to me, and they took them all back when they were done. It was just a wonderful experience to work with our library and with that family, and the utmost cooperation from them, which I didn't necessarily have from everybody else, because there still are some people who had experiences that have left them very bitter, and they were not willing to be cooperative. But even with the treatment that she got, her family was willing to, because they wanted that story to be out there, and so they were really cooperative. So it was a wonderful experience to work with them. And I also, like I said, met other people, like the woman who was the archivist at Girls High, who was actually since passed away, since I think she passed away right after the book was published. But all of that was really very good for me to be able to put that in the book, that personal experience in the book. So yeah, she was a fascinating person. And the other thing about it is she wrote all these stories apparently, but they can't find them. She wanted to be a writer. And one of the things she said in one of the letters that she wrote was that she wanted to increase her writing skills. She was doing short stories about the area that we live in. And they haven't, if they, they might come across them one of these days. It would be a real treasure if they find them. It would be great. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I hope that they find them. Let's see, what other questions? Jody, this question is for you. We're going back in time to the 19th century. When we think about higher education institutions as places that disseminate information, that really are places where ideas are cultivated, William and Mary was a place where pro-slavery ideology was cultivated in the 19th century. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this and how might it have affected the African Americans that were at William and Mary in the antebellum period.
Okay. Well, certainly, probably the most ardent, or at least became most famous in his own time, pro-slavery ideologue was Thomas Roderick Dew, who attended William and Mary as an undergrad and went to grad school at William and Mary. He was from a slaveholding family in the Tidewater area, and he left for a brief period, relatively brief period, and went to Europe for his health and to continue his education. Came back to William and Mary in 1826 when he was hired as a professor. And I guess 4 years after he got back was Nat Turner's Rebellion. And he watched there were debates, 13 days of debates in the Virginia General Assembly over whether or not to end slavery in Virginia. Nat Turner really frightened people. And so there were these debates, and a lot of the legislators from the western part of the state were the ones who were in favor of ending slavery, because slavery was not as crucial to the economy there or to their livelihoods as it was in the eastern part of the state. And so they debated, and they decided basically that they couldn't end slavery because they couldn't afford to. Well, they couldn't afford to, and then the ones in the East really didn't want to because they needed these laborers. But they couldn't afford to because they believed because they were property, they needed to compensate the owners. And so they needed to compensate the owners, and then they needed to relocate these several thousand people in the state to other locations because they believed that they could not live together with a free Black population, that large anyway of a free Black population. And so to pay the owners, to pay to have them removed, and to pay to have them possibly get land somewhere else to start up, that was going to be a good part of Virginia's financial bottom line. And so they decided on their own that they were going to have to stay with the status quo. Now, what Dew did, though, was he came forward with this, his treatise, I guess, on pro-slavery ideology, and responded to different parts of their argument. Like one, like there were some people who actually did believe it was wrong and that they were going to be condemned by God, and Dew assured them that they would not be, because it was the English who had brought slavery to this country, and because the Americans were left to deal with it, but God would not hold them responsible because they hadn't done it, but they had to deal with the situation. Also, that every great civilization in the world had begun with slavery, and they were just doing what every other civilization had done. And so there was a long list of a lot of rationale, a lot of biblical rationale for justifying slavery. And so he wrote this. He gave a scholarly treatment to something that they had already decided, but he made it a scholarly, that the educated people have said that this is so it must be. And there were other pro-slavery ideologues. Nathaniel Beverly Tucker, who was the son of St. George Tucker, and there were students that you will see in that were pro-slavery, became pro-slavery. So and Dew in particular put himself and William and Mary on the map what he had done, because it wasn't just William and Mary. Of course, there were pro-slavery people all over the South, all over the country, I should say. But in terms of William and Mary's claim to fame at that time, it was post Nat Turner and Thomas Dew.
Thank you, Jody. We have Caroline who just joined us. Hi. Thank you for coming in the room. We have some broad concluding questions that I think we should, we're coming up on the 8 p.m. hour. So I'm going to ask them, a couple of them, and I think that'll conclude the event. For the Learn Project, you know, we've been around. The report is on the first 8 years of the project. We have a question about what does the next year, 10 years of the project look like ideally? So big question. And do you have any project or personal priorities in the research that you want to do? And then we have a question specifically for Jawan on what kind of, what types of things will you do in the community, and do you expect any challenges? So that is some big questions. Whoever would like to go first?
Ooh, okay, I'll try to take this on. The next 10 years, well, I have to say that's really hard because we had no idea really in 2009 or 10 what the next 10 years was going to be like then. I mean, I think certainly we want to continue with what we are calling our signature projects, but we're expecting to keep expanding because this work is really endless, I think. One, just getting the word out, getting the word and then getting it out there. One of the things we would like to know more about is exactly how William and Mary benefited from slavery, and what was the economic upturn with slavery and William and Mary. Also, I think, certainly we will continue to be researching and trying to understand this human population, these people. I always believe that there's another box or two to be, discovered, and so I think we will continue looking for this story. It's 327 years. So I don't think, we certainly haven't finished this story. I want to see us, certainly continue to work in the community and expand that. I want us to be resources for the schools in the area. I want us to do more collaborating, or as much collaborating as we can on campus, with campus organizations and departments, but certainly with the community organizations. And so, I will say to folks out there listening in the community, people who live here, if you have things that you think we can help with, or we would like to hear from you about that. And I'll turn it over to Jawan.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. Community. And of course, there are challenges with that, in that comes about, with relationships. And it takes time to build relationships. And so, and I'm new to the community. And so as Jody just stated, it's an endless process. This is not something that will stop in 2 years. It doesn't, it can kind of go on. So whoever comes after me who engages on this work, I hopefully will leave behind a good network of people for them to connect with, and also that we have developed a set of case studies that we can further build on, particularly as it relates to the genealogical research. In terms of developing working groups around that, I think with any project, as stated, it just requires that, that trust building component. You're dealing with family histories, and sometimes when you're doing genealogy research, things come to the surface that people don't want to be known. And so that's a challenge. And so working in the context of a community and collaborating on that, of how to tell a story, the best way to tell the story, that can become, you know, a challenging aspect. But that just kind of comes with the territory. So I'm really interested over the next couple of years to really deeply engage and collaborate with those who have started their research, who want to collaborate with us. And so, yeah.
So there was a question for me that I only saw part of, that asked me to talk a little bit about the 50th, but I didn't see the rest of it, so I'm not sure what the whole question was. Can you see something?
In your research, what appeared to you like large or small triumphs in the last 50 years? And what were the disappointing moments of, I can't believe we're still waiting?
Wow, that's huge. Do we have another hour? Well, first of all, for anyone who doesn't really know what the 50th was like, briefly, it was the three women who our students lovingly, affectionately nicknamed the Legacy Three, were the first African-American students in residence, and they came here in 1967. And what happened was there was a committee before I got involved who decided that they wanted to do something to commemorate the 50 years. And they were also going to do something to commemorate the coeducation, which was 100 years, the year following what we did. And so they asked me to chair the committee, and what we did was to actually just bring the women on campus, talk to them, interviewed them. We had a lot of programming. I recently read something, a student said that, you know, we didn't do much, but I don't know where she was, because we had something going just about every night of the week for the whole year. And we had wonderful workshops and panels and all kinds of speakers who were wonderful, and students were, you know, got to meet them and have whole classes with them. So it was really a good year, and it was wonderful that the three women were able to participate in just about everything that went on during that year. So it was a great year. One of the things that we as a committee, and they were on the committee when they wanted to come to meetings and that sort of thing. But one of the things that we had all decided was that we didn't want it to just be a year and then it would be over and it would be like it never happened. And so we tried to figure out things that we could take into the future and continue. And it is a continuing story. It's something that Jody said earlier. We still have, as African Americans on this campus and probably in the world, but specifically on this campus, we still have a lot of firsts. I could have gone on and on. I have like 2 pages of firsts, but I could have gone on and on had we, you know, whirled enough in time to put down all of the firsts that happened for African Americans here. It's not a happy thing to say that in this day and age we still have things that African Americans have not been able to experience on this campus at this institution. So the progress is there. It's good, but it also is like, what took it so long. People were amazed that it was only 50 years that we had had the first African-American students in residence. The early people who came during that time too, other Black students who were here, were saying, you know, we were not encouraged to stay on campus. One young man in particular, he's one of the first who graduated with an undergraduate degree. There were two Black men. And one of them said, they said, you have a family in Williamsburg, you don't need to stay in the dorms. There were those kinds of moments of disappointment. And then what was even more, and I'll try to really be brief, we did a sort of chat and chew at the Africana House. And these students who were there, and this is 2017, they're saying some of the same things were going on. They were having some of the same problems that these early students had experienced. That was really disheartening. That was very disheartening. Faculty some of them were complaining. However, there has been progress. And in some ways, I think you sometimes have to just be grateful for the progress that you can make. But I think there could be more. In fact, I know there could be more. And I think that having something like the Lemon Project and having a commemoration like the 50th helps us to put all that in perspective and kind of understand what that history is and how we can move it, how we can best move it forward. And it takes the effort of all of us to do that. And I just wanted to say one thing to Jawan too, is that I'd like you to get in touch with me because I have some information that might be helpful. I did talk to a number of our people in our community who were not alums at William and Mary, but they were connected in such a way that I think you'll find some of that information very, very interesting. But I think that's what has happened with the 50th. It was the beginning of something that I hope will continue throughout the rest of the years.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I thank you to Dr. McLendon. Thank you to Joanne and Molly and Caroline and Jody. Thank you to the folks from the Williamsburg Regional Library. Thank you to those who asked us questions. Please check out our upcoming events. We have one on October 15th with the Virginia Coastal Policy Center. And then we'll be discussing later in October Coates's The Case for Reparations. So we look forward to your questions and comments, and please go to the William Mary Barnes & Noble and check out Dr. McLendon's Building on the Legacy book. And I suspect you could go in person and you can go and buy it online as well. Do you have any concluding thoughts, Jody?
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Sarah Thomas, for once again being an outstanding host for this project. And good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.